Boris, good afternoon.
Jeff, how you been, man?
Not too bad, buddy. Long time. Welcome to the Medium Podcast. How's your week been treating you?
No, I appreciate you having me. And all I can say is that it's been a crazy week, but given the current climate of what's happening in the world, I really can't complain. So,
You mean it's all daisies, it's all rainbows, it's all unicorns. There's nothing wrong with the world, right?
oh no, not at all. I mean, for me, it's really interesting. Like I said, I've had a really busy week this week. But when
Yeah,
I kind of step out and look at what's happening, I mean, you've got the war in Ukraine taking place, and my missus happens to be Russian. So
yeah,
I've got like two different perspectives coming at me from that angle.
yeah.
You've got the whole inflation stuff happening. You've got all the political correctness stuff happening. Like, and I think it was just yesterday or today or something, you've got all that mass shooting stuff happening. So when you kind of put in that context, my week's not so bad. So, yeah.
It's not too bad, eh? And just a bit of context, you and I, we first met probably, was it 2018, 2019?
Something
And
like that. It was
and
ages ago.
and it
It
was
was
via an
absolutely ages ago.
interview, basically, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I came to you for an interview for some sort of sales role. I can't even remember what the role was called, but
Okay.
we ended up having a chat about that interview, and then I think it was 20 or 30 minutes in, we just said, "Hey, like, let's not."
I was just too honest with you, wasn't I?
Pretty much, yeah. You're a straight shooter. You pretty much said like, "Hey, Boris, like, if you want the role, you can have it, but I honestly think you shouldn't." And that was the first time I've ever had anyone say that to me. That was the first time ever,
Really?
like that
Wow.
that 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 level of honesty. Yeah. And then when you kind of followed up and said, "Hey, like, I'm not sure if it was you or if it was me. I honestly can't remember."
Yeah.
But it was like, "Hey, do you want to go and like grab a coffee and just like chat?" Because we were having such a good conversation during the interview itself that we decided like, "Hey, you know what? Like, let's kind of step out of this corporate world and have a
Correct.
real conversation," kind of thing. So
No, I appreciate it. You even had curry at my place as well.
I did, yeah.
You did. So,
You had a beautiful house as well. So
so a lot's going on in your life, a lot's going around in the world. You mentioned geopolitics, the war in Ukraine, the shooting we had recently, obviously in America.
mhm.
What's sort of going in your mind when you sort of think about these things? Inflation, there was startup life. You made a very interesting response about, how do you sort of quiet the mind when there's so much noise around you? But before we talk about that, what's the one single noise that just sort of constantly ringing in your head?
I guess for me right now, and I'm still kind of coming to terms with it, to be perfectly honest. But it's kind of what do I do now with my life?
Mm,
That's really the key question I have in my head. And that question kind of being in my head has given me, I guess, the ability to stop and think and look at the situation and see all these different narratives that are kind of in the world, which is why I'm thinking about a lot of these things.
mm.
But for me, it really does come down to what is it that I want to do. I mean, I've gone through a hell of a journey already. I've
You
done
have.
startups, some successful, some not so successful. Um, and now I'm just at a place where I'm kind of asking myself, what's next and why, really. So I guess it's refinding another purpose. So I had a purpose.
Mm,
I feel like I've met it to some degree where I'm satisfied, and
mhm.
now I kind of need to find that next thing, really. So I'm in a bit of a limbo state, and that's really what's on my mind. So
Is it very much a fork in a road, or does that fork have many prongs to it?
I, I, I don't think it's a fork. I think it's more of a new road almost. So I've kind of come to the conclusion of my previous road, and it almost feels like it's time for a new chapter to kind of begin. That's the sensation that I'm getting anyway. But I'm really spending a lot of time in trying to understand what that chapter should be,
Mm,
like what is important in that chapter, and how I craft that chapter. How is that going to impact when I come to this fork, or not fork, but like this next chapter again? So what should this next chapter be really? What is the primary focus of this next step? And that's something that I'm kind of, I guess, debating internally within with. So yeah.
It's interesting how when you talked about purpose, it's very much an evolving sort of thing, isn't it? So you had a purpose, you pretty much satisfied it, but now you're sort of looking on to the next one. Now, I know in your case, Boris, I know we had these deep conversations. I think for you, it's not, is it about the hedonic treadmill in terms of you trying to just achieve? But I think for me, in terms of how I see you, I don't think you're on the hedonic treadmill. You're very much about going onto that new road to set that new path. Is that correct? Or
Yeah, I would say that's right. I think for me, it's at one point in time, it was really just about achievement, achieve, and kind of fit that mold in terms of like what society would expect of someone, I guess you could say. But then I kind of came to the realization that like purpose is a pretty fickle thing, right? Like it kind of changes pretty frequently. Sometimes we think we have it and it turns out we don't. Sometimes we think we've achieved it and it turns out we haven't. Like, and sometimes achieving it's just not worth the time. And it kind of makes me think that there's really a big issue with society right now in terms of a lot of people kind of, or when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of people within my generation that are kind of trying to uncover what that purpose is. It seems to be a pretty big conversation with at least my friend group when I kind of sit down with them and chat like one-on-one and basically talk shit. It always ends up kind of coming back to that level. Like, what is it that you're trying to do? And a lot of people are saying like, hey man, I'm just working and, you know, going along day to day kind of thing. But I get the sneaking suspicion that everyone's kind of trying to
find an answer.
Desperately find something, right? Desperately try to find something. And I think a lot of that's been taken away from us just because of the way society is right now. Like we have it better than we've ever had before. We've got more free time to kind of do these things. We're lucky enough to do that. And with that kind of, I guess, comes the realization that a lot of people lack purpose. And you might be one of them. So yeah.
The irony is that we have everything, yet we don't have it. We don't really have anything at all. The irony, isn't it? We have so much choice, but here we are, we're still questioning what that is. So amongst your friends, Boris, have you guys picked out potentially what it is?
You mean in terms of like the whole lack of purpose thing, or the whole, you know, what's next kind of thing? Or
what's next? What's next for you, Boris?
Or
is it still very much in the early stages? Because I know you're a bit of a thinker.
Yeah. That is the question, isn't it?
I suppose, have you come to any sort of, not definitive conclusion, but some answer as to the questions you're asking yourself?
So for me, the questions that I'm asking myself really is, what kinds of experiences do I want to have? That's kind of number one. And I think that question is really driven by the ego more so than anything else. But then I'm also asking myself the question of, what do I need to be doing to actually have that sense of fulfillment as well? So what experiences do I want, but what do I actually need to have as well to have a sense of fulfillment? So is that a family orientated question? Is it a question of work? Is it a question of starting up another venture where I feel like I'm solving a problem that is relevant? Is that problem actually relevant, or is it tied to some sort of revenue generated mindset? Right? Am I kind of pursuing money? Am I pursuing relationships? Am I pursuing experiences? What is that, right? And if it's all of it, then which one starts first? Which one comes after, and so forth. So it's a bit. I guess it's a bit complicated in my head right now, and I'm not sure if I'm just overthinking it or whatever. But that's kind of the train of thought that I'm on. So
I think what's interesting is that We're sometimes too clever,
Yeah, pretty much.
aren't we? We sort of overanalyze, we sort of think. It's somewhat quite selfish, isn't it? That here we are, we're trying to really work out, is there a sort of purpose to what we do? But I think fundamentally, we are no different from any other organization. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, we all become one with the earth.
Yeah. I mean, you come from nothing and you return to nothing. That's a pretty much a given. But I mean, it also comes down to, I guess, what your belief in that whole structure is. You know, that's a pretty spiritual kind of topic at that point.
Do your friends have very similar approaches to this, or is it very much a question where you guys do talk about it, but when it comes to the end of the conversation, you're like, it's too hard, it's too philosophical. Let's just go back to having fun and just talking some shit.
A lot of the times it actually does go back down to that, yeah. But I would also say, like, now that you've brought up that whole, I guess, spiritual angle to this topic, I guess religion and kind of belief system plays a role on kind of how people settle that conversation or how they have that conversation. Like, for me, for example, like, you know, Jeff, like I'm pretty spiritual, not necessarily religious, but pretty spiritual. I've gone through a couple of experiences with different things, with like shamans and whatever else, and I've gone through these different journeys, and that's kind of helped me process things and whatever else. But yeah, that's definitely played a role for sure.
And through your day-to-day, these questions, they don't really hinder you, do they? They're more something in the back of your head. You're still enjoying life. I know you're still enjoying life. I know recently it seems like you've gone on from a holiday for ages.
Yeah.
Was that a good time for you to sort of, take stock, cut out the noise, bit of a rethink? I know COVID is a conversation I've had with many, many people. It's all changed us in some shape or form. Has that break given you a bit of a new lease on sort of life, so to speak?
I wouldn't say a new lease of life, but I think it's helped me run like a certain experiment that I've been wanting to run, running to run for a while.
Wow.
So what I did during my break, I went off to Bali, and I went to the south of Bali, and I just pretty much stayed at a resort and sat on the beach for a couple of weeks, really. but what I did was I just turned everything the fuck off. Like, no news, no mobile, no laptop, nothing. Literally nothing.
So the phone was literally turned off.
It was turned off. I did not receive communication from anyone for that time.
Wow.
And what it made me realize was that, like, so much of what happens in like the news cycle of what we read kind of adds to that level of stress that we kind of experience. Like, we read all these events that are happening overseas. We read all these events that are impacting us. We're reading things on inflation. We're reading things on like property prices, like all this shit that's pretty much constantly happening. But then what you realize is that you can go off for like 3 weeks, turn everything off, come back, and shit's the same. So realistically,
you have a shitload of notifications.
You have a shitload of notifications, but like nothing's changed. I mean, things don't necessarily move as fast as people may think that they do. Like, it's
probably not as important as you think it is.
That's exactly right, and a lot of shit that we think is important is not that important, and a lot of things that you think that other people think are important are not that important. So yeah, really? that experiment people. Kind of, yeah.
So 2 weeks, zero technology.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel?
Pretty damn great. Like, I'm going to do it more often. Maybe even in 6-month cycles, actually. Just turning off for a while every 6 months is probably something that I'm seriously considering right now.
Because when I go on holidays, I do the same thing. I turn off. And the beauty of traveling overseas is that when you get a new SIM card, I get a new SIM card because obviously I might need to call my wife, check on the kids and whatnot. But that's purely to make phone calls. So there's no data. So when you have no data, you can't really do anything. Why did you want to do that first, Boris? Why did you decide yourself that, hey, I want to do this experiment? What was your motivation?
It's something that I've always wanted to do for a long time. Like I think it was at the start of COVID when it kind of dawned on me. At the time, I was like all of a sudden put in a position where I had a lot more time to myself. I guess you can say, like there was a lot more working from home. The whole travel component of life was kind of cut away. So all of a sudden, you have all these extra hours where you can kind of pay more attention to other things that might be happening around you. And then I started noticing things like different narratives that I kind of pushed onto you through different like news outlets and whatever else. And then all of a sudden you realize that there's so much information coming your way, and there's so many different narratives that are trying to put you in their own little tribe of operating. And it's just exhausting if you really pay a lot of attention to it. So I at that point in time, I kind of asked myself, like, what would happen if you just switched off completely, just dropped all the different narratives, dropped all the different information sources, and just like went back to nature, basically, And when I say nature, like, I mean, sitting on a beach or whatever, but just going back to a more basic form, right?
A time before the iPhone.
Yeah, a time before the iPhone. Because that's a great point. Like the whole mobile device and social media stuff, like we don't even know what kinds of impacts like these devices and those platforms are having on our society, right? Like there's definitely a correlation with like mental health and whatever else when it comes to the social media side of things. And being constantly connected is probably not too good of a thing either. So yeah.
It's interesting. In the prior podcast, I had a chat to a CEO of a logistics firm, and we talked about Slack. I'm still scared of Slack.
Why is that?
I'm scared. Like there were days where I would wake up and I wouldn't want to pick up my phone because I was just that afraid of the Slack notifications. That notification style sometimes still scares me when I hear it.
Well, why is that though? Is that because like you kind of correlated it to work or like issues or like what's like
pretty much like the only time I'll hear about it when there was something going wrong.
Right, so you would have to get messages when shit was on fire.
Basically, there was no conversation. It was basically, I have this fire, I need help.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, Slack or any sort of business communication application has its purpose. But for me, you're right. I did attribute it to it as an alarm going in the back of my head whenever that ping came on board.
Did you do anything to kind of overcome that, or is it still kind of like a thing? Or
if I were to create an organization, I would think twice before implementing an instant messaging application. Dare I say, if there was a need, I would talk to the vendor and say that we need to limit. There's got to be a way where you limit the amount of messages that get sent per day. Like I think there's a purpose for it, but it just became too easy. And the use of technology is very much a disciplined approach. My conclusion is that I would think twice before I implement an instant messaging tool. Based on my experience.
But do you think like the benefits outweigh the cons? I guess like that's an actual interesting conversation to have. Like is the benefit of instant messaging a net boon in terms of like innovation and kind of getting things done compared to the, I guess, downsides of stress and whatever else, like in the context of business and Slack and whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I think if you're an organization and you've clearly stated what the guardrails are, and you have really defined how the organization should be utilizing this instant messaging platform. That in itself requires a lot of thinking. You might reduce the number of rooms. You might cap certain groups to a certain number. I think on a relative basis, if an organization had the right guidelines of usage, I would say that the benefits, yes, would outweigh the cons. But you need to have those guidelines in place, because if you don't, it's just too much. Because when you think about it, right, you've got Slack, you've got your personal applications. So I thought I was actually quite clever by separating my work phone with my personal phone. And to a degree, it was actually quite beneficial in the sense that I could actually turn it off during the weekend. Now, like you, after the 2 weeks you got back from Bali, I'm sure you would have just had a ton of messages when you just turned on mobile network, right? So for me, when the Monday morning kicked around, I suppose that's where the fear kicked in, was that since I turned it off during the weekend, the Monday morning at 8 o'clock when I turned it on, you were like, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. I still haven't gone through all of them, to be fair. Even now.
Even now, wow. So it just goes to show you how much sort of communication is going through it. How about you? Do you agree that the cons, the pros outweigh the cons, or you?
I don't know. I find it like an interesting debate to have. Like, but for me, that debate would be interesting for the whole like social media aspect and stuff like that. Like, do we kind of have a limit on social media interaction? You know, like is that communication more damaging than something like Slack, right? Like,
Sure. I suppose if you have a disciplined approach to it, well, like anything in life, right? As long as you do it in moderation, it's okay, right? Now, for you and I, I think we had the best of both worlds in a sense of basically I'll define life nowadays as basically pre-iPhone and post-iPhone. And I think you and I, we had the luxury, so to speak, of living in a time which is pre-iPhone. I think if one has a discipline to limit him or herself, obviously that's very subjective, right? I think that's a way forward. But how do you then instill that discipline into the younger generation who literally grew up with a handheld?
Yeah, that's an interesting conversation to have right now. Do you instill that discipline, or do you enforce that discipline? Are we at a point in time where instilling that discipline is no longer an option, and enforcing it is the only way? Or does enforcing it pretty much open up a whole bunch of issues in terms of like government overreach and policy and whatever else? And we should be relying on like instilling, you know, like if you look at like different governments, I think it was like the CCP, right? Chinese Communist Party. They actually enforced I think it was an hour a day of video gaming, and 2 hours and 2 hours each weekend, right?
Correct.
Like a lot of people would say that that's like a bit much, right? But if you were to take the same thing and apply it to like social media, how many people would say it's too much? Or would they say that that's like a net benefit to society's mental health, you know?
Very good point. Very good point, buddy.
Yeah. Where is that?
I suppose I'll give you two sides of the coin, right? Now, if you go down the path of the CCP, for example, and they put an arbitrary limit of 1 hour per day of social media, right? I think that could work very well. I suppose for me, you still want to give people the choice.
Yeah.
Now, as a dad of 2 kids, I very much instill a time limit. I know that my concern when they grow up is that there will be classmates and friends where a 1 hour cap could mean 5 hours per day. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to have that conversation where my son or daughter goes to me, hey, Dad, XYZ has 5 hours per day. How come I only got an hour?
Yeah.
So therefore, I do see benefits in having an enforceable limit on social media use. But at the same time, I do not want to be restrictive of personal choice.
Mm. Yeah, that's a fine. It's a fine line. I'm
It
in the
is.
same boat as you. Like I'm a strong believer of just live and let live. Really, like let people do what they want to do as long as they're not harming others in the process of doing it.
It's
And
simple, isn't it?
and same for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like it's pretty straightforward philosophy. But then at the same time, you kind of think about it, and then you ask yourself, like, well, all these parents that I know are enforcing these limits for good reasons. Should that be like a societal baseline for kids under a certain age, like under 10? Do you really need access to social media under 10?
Mm.
You know, is that something that you need, period? I don't know, that's a good question. And then you might have people that say, well, you know what, it's not so much the social media. I want to teach my kids how to use like computers and devices and whatever, because a lot of jobs are requiring those kinds of
Fair
devices and
enough.
that ecosystem, right? And that's fair. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
But you know, is that benefit outweighing the, I guess, downside? You know,
And I
like
think,
we
uh, and I think that answer is very much a nuanced answer, isn't it?
it is, but I think it's one of those things that it's one of those, I guess, rare situations where society needs to come together and figure out what they want to do with it, because what's happening in this space is impacting pretty much everybody. Like
Mm.
if you just look at the whole like mental health space and like the increases in mass shootings and whatever else, and all this other stuff, right? Um, there's a reason why those statistics are going up, and they're kind of lined up with releases of social media and, I guess, more adoption of like mobile devices and whatever else.
Here's another spanner for you, right?
Yep.
Obviously, a lot of these big tech firms, these are the organizations that do this. And needless to say, their motive is simple, right? To keep your eyes on the screen so they can basically dish out ads.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, right? That then begs the question, do these organizations have a responsibility to society? But that goes against the objective of a publicly listed company, in which our objective is to maximize shareholder returns. Now, unless you change the definition of a publicly listed company in terms of who they actually work for, societal benefits, it's just going to fall on deaf ears, isn't it?
Okay, I guess you could think of it that way as well, but I think there's been a bit of an evolution in that whole model, I guess you can say. Like I think fundamentally, yeah, algorithms and whatever else were kind of used to just get eyeballs on content, and then that way you can sell those eyeballs to advertisers and effectively make money. That was the model.
Yeah.
But I think now those same algorithms are being used to facilitate certain agendas as well. So I think the evolution of what you're describing has kind of taken place, and now we've got different nuances in that whole like algorithm conversation to be looked at.
Because
Like
you're correct, that algorithm could be pushing a certain agenda.
yeah, and it really and if you really want to test it, it really is. I mean, you can look at you can simply just look at like different news sites and see the difference in the way that they present their articles. I mean, classic example is Fox News versus CNN. Like completely different worlds. You'd almost think as if like America's a completely different space depending on which site you read and who you follow and whatever else. You can also do simple things like jump onto Google and type out a certain phrase which might be a bit controversial, and then jump onto DuckDuckGo or some other browser and type out that same phrase and get a completely different search result. There's a lot of these little things that I kind of seeded into this conversation that are really I'm not even sure how they're influencing us, but they're definitely influencing us in some way.
So when you think about it, that's very interesting, actually, when you mentioned about the search results, that if you looked at controversial topic 1, 2, 3, and you put it into Safari, Google, and DuckDuckGo, you might get different responses altogether, right? Mm-hmm. That's very much free speech, expression of self.
You mean in terms of the results that you get, or?
What I'm trying to say is that aren't the results a reflection of your behavior?
I don't necessarily think so, because if you pretty much format your entire PC, jump on through private browsing onto Google. So Google has no information on your device, has no information on you as an individual, and you are typing in these search terms, you will get these results. So effectively, these results are coming to you from a blank canvas background perspective. So they don't really know any background on you, but they're giving you these results.
Interesting.
That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. So for me, like that is an interesting point, and I think that's kind of like a lot of what's happening there is driven by tribalism. Like if you look at the, like, I think it was Twitter, right? I'm not too sure how. Are you across what's happening with Twitter and whatever else?
In terms of like Sandbots, the M&A deal, or
but also the employees that work there. So
okay.
Twitter is something like 98 or 99% Democrat. The employees there.
Okay.
So when you've got engineers and whatever else working on these algorithms, are they really just working on the algorithms for the sake of advertiser and company benefit, or is there a time where certain other things might be seeded into that equation? You know, do we want to push like a certain narrative?
So straight away, it's biased. That algorithm is biased.
It's biased. It really is biased. And I mean, the reason I'm typing in the background is because I'm actually like doing that search right now as we speak.
So, like interesting.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
So when you think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for the next generation, if you were to peel the layer of the onion and get right to the core, is it very much arming our next generation to think critically? Because when you think about it, we, you, me, society, governments, organizations, we can't hold everyone's hand. We can't adapt to everyone, right? There will inevitably be a blanket approach, a blanket solution that tries to please everyone. But you and I know you can't, right? So does the onus really rest upon the individual to critically analyze? And then when you think about it, the solution to all this comes down to simple education.
Yeah, I would say that's right, Jeff. But I also think that there's probably more problems to overcome before that becomes a solution. I would say even our educational institutions are not quite right now either.
Interesting. In what specific way?
I mean, I'll use the American school system as an example. For example, they are having a huge issue right now with education. It's one of the hot button issues. Basically, there's things like critical race theory and a couple other kind of topics floating in that educational system that's effectively trying to, teach like 5-6-year-olds about like what a trans person is, and what are all these different genders and what do they mean and whatever else. So there's clearly like a bit of an agenda element kind of
there is
making its way into the educational system. So I think it goes beyond that. I think like critical thinking is fine. Being able to critically think is really important, but I also think there's a huge craving for, like, I have a feeling that a lot of people are craving responsibility, and I think that with younger generations we have to give them more responsibility for themselves and
we
for
need
what
to help them.
not help them, as in give them the ability to be responsible for something, for some sort of outcome, right?
Okay.
Like I think that is the ultimate like teaching tool. If you want to teach someone how to be upright and a good person, like I think we need to facilitate environments where people are responsible for themselves and responsible for their own outcomes, and it isn't necessarily someone else's fault if you fall flat on your face, if that makes sense, which seems to be a fairly common thing these days. And I think like if and when I have kids, that's really the key thing that I want to instill in my kid, like the sense that they are responsible for their own outcomes, and they have the control to kind of produce the result that they want to produce, as long as they're willing to put in the effort. But ultimately, it's their responsibility to do so. Like university degrees aren't going to do it for you. I'm not going to do it for you. You getting a merit in like schools isn't going to do it for you.
No, it's very much quite a qualitative teaching method in a way, because you can't grade this.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, that's kind of my thoughts on that. I think there's like a lot of layers here, Jeff.
Oh,
and I mean,
many.
I could
Always.
talk to you. Yeah, I could talk to you about this for like hours.
What's interesting?
I think. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that brought me heartache, I'm not too sure if you saw this. There was a Facebook, no, there was a LinkedIn post going, it went around probably about a month ago, where some software engineer's sister's daughter basically committed suicide.
Yep.
I think, obviously, it's not proven. I'm just stating the facts here, right? Apparently, Snapchat was utilized. And obviously, with Snapchat, you can basically say anything and it disappears, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
And that drove that girl to commit suicide. Now, that's heartbreaking. That's as heartbreaking as to what happened to the kids in Texas in terms of the mass shooting, right? I think what's interesting is that our conversation has probably, this conversation is probably happening globally.
Yeah.
You know, we're in Sydney right now. You and I are chatting over Zoom. I'm sure this is happening in person in Paris, Tokyo, Shanghai, Mozambique, Madagascar, whatever, right? What do you recommend we can do, or as a society, we can do to alleviate some of this? I'm not telling you to give me a solution is the silver bullet that's going to cut right through it, right? But it seems to me, from what you're trying to share with me in terms of giving children a responsibility, the power really comes from within the household.
Yeah, like the thing is, Jeff, is that I'm not really educated enough to be in a position to give a recommendation. That's the reality. So for me, I'm at a stage right now where I can have a conversation, I can give my opinion, I can debate on what I feel versus what maybe you feel. But if you were to ask me like, hey, what's the recommendation as to how we can kind of narrow down on this and take action, I don't know. Like that's the scary part about this whole dilemma. It's so broad
Intricate.
and so embedded and so intricate, like you said, that anyone who says that they have a solution is probably like a bit full of themselves, really. Like you know, you one person might say, hey, instill certain values in the household, and then all of a sudden your kid goes into a certain educational system and they effectively get changed into a completely different person. They get radicalized or whatever it is, right? They go through a system that's just a shit system, and after 18 years of you not seeing your kid for 6-7 hours a day, they turn into someone completely different than who you thought you raised. But that's just the reality, that institution raised them in such a way that counteract your way of raising them. And you could be the best parent in the world in the household, but then you put them through school and it's all for nothing, right? If they go through that wrong path, so to say.
Good point. Good point. Very good point.
You know, and then you've got things like how their peers interact with them. So you might have a great school system and you might be great parents, but then at the end of the day, like they've still got 6 or 7 hours where they could potentially be on the phone or social media consuming content of God knows what, right? Like you just had that recent TikTok beheading that just kind of happened. Like how many like 6, 7, 8 year olds have just been like completely fucked up because they've seen like a 10-second clip of some guy getting his like head lopped off, right? So I mean, how do you peel that onion, right? Like how can any one person kind of recommend anything in that situation? I think the only thing that we can do right now, realistically right now, is just have the conversation, and I mean publicly have the conversation, with as many people as possible in as many forums as possible, and kind of use, I guess, society's collective brain to come up with a first step that might make sense. But yeah, right now I don't have a recommendation. That's the truth. So
The unfortunate thing is that conversation is good. Conversation opens a door. Conversation brings two people together, right? But unfortunately, in this space, you maybe need to go a bit firmer to actually initiate change. That's a scary part.
yeah,
And
but then
what's-
then you come back to that conversation of like freedom versus like the CCP way, right?
So you can go down that route of restricting civil liberties, so to speak, but then you are protecting society, so to speak. But then obviously that has its pros and cons. The inverse is that you don't do anything. You let people operate to their own devices, literally,
Mhm.
and it goes all loose. I suppose for me as a dad, I think about these things as well. I got to remember my son's only 4.5 years old. He's only 5 years old, and basically he observes, doesn't really pay attention to what I say. He just observes of what I do, right? It's a tough one, isn't it? It's multi-layered, intricate, so nuanced. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I want to move away from just a conversation.
Yeah.
What's the next step? What's the next step after having that conversation?
I think you can only really take steps for yourself. Realistically, I genuinely think that. I think until a much larger conversation takes place, the only thing you can really do is craft yourself as an individual, and if enough individuals craft themselves as individuals, then that could be the difference. That's I know it sounds quite grim, but that's my thinking right now. Yeah.
I'm very curious. Why are you so? What brought about this interest and this understanding about the world's going to the shit because of social media, so to speak?
I'm actually quite optimistic about the future. Like I'm not a pessimistic person by nature. I actually think that we're experiencing like greater prosperity than ever before. The problems that we're complaining about are nothing compared to the problems that previous generations have had. Really, like we're doing great. Like poverty is at an all-time low. We're freaking like thinking about going to Mars. Like we've got some of the greatest tools in the world. We're literally connecting with, like, you name it, and any race on the planet can like be a friend with one another. Try doing that back in like the 1200s or the 1300s or during the Great Crusades or whatever. Like, good luck, right? The situation that we're in is great. So don't get me wrong. I'm super optimistic about where we're heading. But for me, it came back to that whole COVID point in time for me. When I kind of plugged out of my daily routine because I just had a little bit more time to kind of sit and think and observe, I noticed that so much of what is being fed to us is just a whole heap of shit from multiple different angles, from like people with different agendas. And it kind of made me realize, hey, like the whole news cycle is full of shit. Like you associate yourself with a certain tribe, and your tribe is like full of shit. And there seems to be like it's almost as if we're going back to like a tribal warfare system, So
And
that
what's
that I feel that that's an incredibly dangerous place to be. When we reach the point where I belong to this caste, or I belong to this tribe, or I belong to this group of people, and other people are completely wrong, and whatever they say is effectively violence, then how do you negotiate and compromise with those people? Like, you don't. You What do you do at that point? You fight, you know. And I think that's the biggest risk, and that is what will set us back, if anything.
yeah, no, yeah, great distinction, right? I think people living nowadays, obviously, let's be honest too, right? Where this can also be a luxury belief. I read about that term in a sense of here's you and I, we're on Zoom. We don't really know what someone who's living in poverty is like. Um, what I'm trying to say is that maybe how news is presented needs to be changed. Now, the reason why I say that is that, as you know, everything is all subscription revenue, right?
Mhm.
Now, if you got a publication, let's just call it Publication X. You need to pay Publication X $15 a month to access its content, right? Now, by nature, that business model means that you need to constantly churn out articles to keep that person in, right? So
Mhm.
needless to say that the dollar motive is the reason why you're constantly churning out material, right? Now, I'm sure you will agree, as you pointed out, there's a lot of shit out there, right? But a lot of it is being generated to generate clicks. And we're generating clicks because it's all about the money. So
Yeah.
maybe, do you think that we need to convert the news into more of a public good that only reports on things which actually need to be reported on?
I actually think that media has especially news media, news media has shied away from being just about money, in my opinion. I think news media is more about narrative. I think I think it's not so much about them generating the click per se, as it is about them pushing a certain narrative and achieving some objective for some other organization that would benefit from that objective being reached.
Mm.
Like, for example, I think it was the New York Times or something. Like, Jeff Bezos acquired that.
Oh,
Do
Washington
you
Post.
Washington
Washington.
Post? Sorry, yeah, that one. Yeah, Washington Post. Like, Jeff Bezos acquired that. Do you think the Washington Post is going to post anything bad about Jeff Bezos? You
It
know,
should. It should.
it should, but it won't. And and
Mm.
and and I haven't seen anything bad come about that, like, since that acquisition. And I mean, why would he acquire a company like that if it wasn't for PR and narrative purposes? I mean, traditional news media is not necessarily a booming business. I think we can both agree on that. So
Mm.
why is that taking place? I think it's not really a money thing. And actually put like a
It's a
lot of thought.
mouthpiece.
It's kind of like a mouthpiece, yeah. It's a mouthpiece for different interest groups, whether that's incredibly wealthy individuals or organizations that have a broader agenda that can impact society. That's really its primary purpose at this point. It's not like
It's
profits. Like,
power influence.
yeah, exactly. But like, profits are great if they can make profits. If someone subscribes, then great, like, they'll do it. But I think that it's not the primary reason. I mean, just look at CNN Plus. Like, they lost $300 million, like, trying to do that, whatever that nonsense program they were trying to set up.
Is that some
Like,
sort of streaming thing, or?
yeah, some sort of like streaming thing that only like presented like woke kind of media or whatever. It was ridiculous. But I think that's its primary reason. And I was actually putting a lot of thought into this before, because I was kind of thinking about potentially having like a certain business idea that would fit in this space. Actually,
Mm.
I have a strong feeling that as we progress with technology moving forward from this point on, a lot of our key institutions, so things like social media, news networks, entertainment, things like that, are probably going to move to a more decentralized model in terms of the way that they operate. So
Okay.
I was kind of thinking, wouldn't that be cool if you had a decentralized news outlet that didn't necessarily have an owner, that was basically pushed by community trust factor. So reporters would go out there, they'll scope out the news, they'll put it on that platform, and then the broader community would dictate what actually makes the headlines and what doesn't. So that would be an incentive to effectively get reporters to report on the news, for the broader community to effectively upvote what they are interested in with what they read. And then those people would effectively get paid some sort of digital currency, depending on how high up their news articles go, depending on how much people flock to that kind of thing, right? So that way the reporter would be incentivized to not just accommodate to a certain tribe or to a certain narrative, to a certain mentality, but it'll be to report on something that has wide enough impact for a bunch of people to be interested in actually knowing about it. So that could be an interesting. Yeah, go on.
Isn't that a bit flawed, though? Because if you give an incentive to that writer to produce a piece that's going to achieve the greatest reach, isn't bias already baked in already from the outset?
Correct. Then you've got like things like clickbait and whatever, right? So there's a whole heap of extra issues that need to be solved for that one. But I think that would at least help a little bit with the whole narrative component, because I think that would kind of disassociate the organization from the actual news, because that way you'd have effectively a platform that isn't really owned by anyone. So that way it doesn't have an interest group that's running it, right?
There's no sort of hidden puppet strings.
Yeah, you can kind of think of it like Reddit or whatever, right? But just think of Reddit, but without Reddit as a company in the back.
Got it.
It's just there, kind of thing.
Have you heard of Substack?
No, I haven't.
So I think a lot of people are doing that already. So they're essentially individual reporters, and they're basically creating their own media outlet, and they're reporting on their own news. I think an interesting piece I read recently was some woman in Europe who basically has a newsletter. She doesn't have to abide by any sort of company rule or whatnot. And she basically provides a scoop of how brands in the luxury segment, she reports on the luxury segment brands.
Mm-hmm.
And she has no affiliation with LVMH or those major luxury brands. She just does whatever she wants. Do you mean something like that, where that writer is not anchored by someone, or
something like that? But I would say, how do you kind of take that and apply it to a whole bunch of writers? You know,
because when you think about it, you and we're doing something similar, aren't we? Like, I'm happy to tell you right now, there's no agenda with the Medium podcast. It's just me.
Just having a chat, right? So
just having a chat, right? Yeah. And we're not pushing a certain agenda. I might find someone who goes against you, for example, in terms of what you believe. But that's part of the whole freedom of speech.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side,
podcasts aren't interesting like medium, aren't they? Like they're relatively new when you really think about it. And I mean, right now they're influencing like a lot of things in the world. I mean, just look at like Joe Rogan's podcast, right?
Yeah,
it makes the news cycle constantly.
He was an inspiration for me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, why are we glorifying, not to discredit these individuals, why are we glorifying tennis stars, movie stars, politicians, and whatnot, who have a public profile? Wouldn't it be more interesting to just hear from everyday people, so to speak?
Yeah, but there's also something interesting to be said about that though as well, Jeff. Like those people who are stars are everyday people.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Like everyone who's an everyday person, so to say, can also be like a star or in the movies or a great athlete or whatever, right? So for me, it's that's an interesting point, you know, like I understand why we kind of glorify them. It's because they're doing things that a lot of us like aspire to, right? Like a lot of people want to be athletic, want to run fast, jump high, look good, like make money, whatever.
Mm.
So kind of sitting down and listening and all that sometimes is nice, right?
It's interesting, isn't it? There was my friend basically goes, why is Tom Brady getting paid $40 million to talk about football when our public school teachers are making a fraction,
Oh,
a
man.
tiny fraction of that. So I suppose
Yeah.
for his sort of view on it, shouldn't that money, like fair enough, go towards the people on the front line who are educating our next generation of kids? Like, I'm not saying Tom Brady isn't, right? He's just obviously putting out the relative salary differences between him,
Yeah.
who's a global star, let's be honest, and he deserves it. There's no doubt about that, right? But it's more of a relative stance to the public school teacher who works at the local school down the road, for example.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. Like, I honestly think teachers need to get paid more, but I also think that we probably need to be a lot more stringent with the way that teachers go through the educational process. I think we should teach teachers like doctors. You spend 8 to 10 years in educating yourself to be a teacher, and only then do you get paid a doctor level salary. I think teachers should get paid the same as doctors, actually.
Good point. So it's not about putting a higher hurdle rate, but just better training in a way.
Yeah, better training. Yeah, but that leads to a whole bunch of other conversations around, like, are universities the best places to actually train our teachers?
Well, I suppose it is, because it's there and it's a good start. How's that sound?
It's a good start, yeah. But if it's enough for, like, to kind of create the system that you want to create, it's got its flaws as well. So,
but I think we're in agreement where if I were to look deeper level about the whole education, not to say that private schools are bad and each to their own in terms of how you want to pay for it. I think for me personally, education needs to be a public good, right? And unfair or fair, or however you see it, right? I don't think it's right for a family, each to their own, of course, right? Where since parent A can afford it, right? Parent A can take their son or daughter to a private school, and most likely that private school is fantastic at what they do, right? And unfortunately, that straight away creates a class division, doesn't it?
yeah.
And straight away, that kid who's 5, 6 years old goes into a public primary school is already so-called disadvantaged. But obviously, once again, that creates a whole can of worms, and there's many layers to this conversation, isn't it?
Well, I mean, how are you planning on navigating it, out of curiosity, like with your kid? I mean, you mentioned 5 years old, pretty much entering school system. Like, what's your thinking on this?
Initially, for me, I've always gone through the public system, Boris, and by all means, the experience could have been a bit better. I'll agree. When I was in high school, I'm very much, I suppose, in a marriage, I suppose I'm very thankful that my wife is very much focused on the academics. I'm very much focused on the life skills. So to me, for my son and daughter, it's more about my role as their dad is to get them ready for life, no matter what comes at them. I mean, no matter what, right? And I'll do my best to do that, right? 2 years ago, I was like, no, that's fine. Education's important, but a standard public school will do the job, and so be it, right? But obviously, as my wife has gone deeper and deeper in terms of the pros and cons of sending my son and daughter to that school or that school, right? There are differences. And as a parent, naturally, you want the best for your kids, right? So I don't know. I don't know yet. Like, I'm very thankful that we live in a suburb where the public school is actually very good, according to I think the NAPLAN test in Australia. It's literally up the road. My son and daughter can literally walk up there, and I don't have to think about it for the next
That's
six
that
six years. So
that's that's interesting. The whole like life skill stuff. Like,
yeah.
is there like certain life skills that you have in mind when you say like life skills? Is there something where
Discipline
is
and
it
humility.
right? Just those two specifically, not like woodworking or like
Okay,
whatever else.
I'll give you the power of three, right? Discipline,
Hmm.
humility, respect.
Right. Okay.
That's what I'll teach you. Everything will center around that.
And is it like done through mantras, or how is that lesson? I
It
guess.
will be done via how I approach life, because I'm pretty sure they'll be observing what I do. It'll be done via, hopefully, they'll be talkative to me.
Hmm.
I actually went to a parenting course called Circle Security.
Hmm.
I will do my best, Boris. The best does
Okay.
not mean 100%. It doesn't mean 90. It doesn't mean 80. It could mean 50.1%.
You got to do what
And
you got to do.
I just
I'm
got to,
just curious. I'm like genuinely curious because I'm expecting myself to also like be asking these questions
yeah.
one day,
So
right? So
discipline, humility, respect is the three-prong network, three-prong sort of categories that I would base my teaching on in terms of life skill. And I think that pretty much encapsulates what I believe are important traits that I
you
want to
know,
instill going forward in my kids.
you know what else is a bit interesting, like on this topic.
Hmm.
Do you ever worry that if if your kids don't have the same hardship that you had growing up,
Mhm.
that they won't be able to, I guess, foster these kind of skills? Do you know what I mean? Like, because for me as a migrant coming into Australia and whatever, I was taught a lot from that experience of coming to Australia on a boat, through living in like what is basically pretty low poverty effectively in Australia, like through going through, I guess, those systems and learning through that experience. That's what taught me. But I find that people who don't necessarily have those challenges might not be able to get those same lessons. Or do you
Yeah,
think
yeah, good
or do you
point.
think there's a way to kind of circumvent that?
I think I will not compare. I will not impose how I went through and believing that my way is the way that you're going to learn from where you are, right? Because I don't know. Like, let's be honest. You and I, we didn't even know that we're going to wake up tomorrow. So I'm just going to focus on the day by day. Getting specifically back to your question of, will they be able to garner those lessons about discipline, humility, and respect without the hardship? Maybe, maybe not. Honestly, I do not care.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's just
Because,
interesting. It's just
yeah,
interesting. Like the most interesting people I know
yeah,
have had some kind of fucked up shit happen to them in the past.
for sure, for sure. I think
That yeah,
that is the greatest lesson.
you know,
You just hope that lesson doesn't kill you, but
yeah, yeah. Sometimes it
yes,
does. So
sometimes it does. Yeah, it does. Sometimes it does. Sometimes those ones who get the greatest lesson of all don't end up sharing that, because that was the last straw.
yeah, last lesson kind of thing.
I suppose what I'm trying to say is that I know that my son and daughter already are their own people. So if you don't listen to me, so be it. I have
No,
a
it's
very
good.
I have a very simple rule to my son. You can do whatever you want. Just eat your food. Don't treat anyone in a way that you don't want to be treated.
Is it still a struggle to actually get them to eat the food, especially when it's like broccoli?
I'll give you something funny, right? This morning, I woke up at probably 7. I got to prepare for the day. I've got to cook his breakfast. I've got to prepare his lunch. I've got to make sure my wife is okay. I've got to check on my daughter. I've got to get changed. I've got to go through my routine. I make sure I have my tea in the morning. It's compulsory.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I probably did so many things within the first 1.5 hours of waking up. In 1 hour, my son is in his bed. His sleeve is off. He's about to change his clothes. 1 hour has passed, and he's been singing to himself for the past 1 hour. It's funny. He sings Paddington Bear for some reason. I know he's hilarious, but yeah, it's a constant challenge with kids. And when the day comes, Boris, you're going to look back and you're going to have a bit of a laugh because they do bring a lot of joy, right? But when you're go in the morning, it's challenging, right? But I know that he's his own man now. He's what's interesting is that I realize as being a dad is that a lot of the things I didn't teach him, he's got it himself. He's actually very resourceful. Like, I'll give you an example. Now, it goes back to the whole nature versus nurture thing. He's got his basketball thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And normally you got to fill water onto the bottom section so it doesn't move, right?
Yeah.
Now, one day I saw him playing with it. It kept on falling down, right? Now, I didn't say anything. And what's interesting is that he actually went into the gym room, so to speak. He picked up a couple of my weights and he plonked it on top of the basketball stand so it wouldn't move.
Really resourceful.
Really resourceful, right?
Yeah.
Another time he wanted to get batteries for his remote control car. This guy, he started doing this when he was 4 years old. He wanted to get batteries for a remote control car. And the cabinets above the laundry, it's pretty high up. So what he does, he gets one chair. Wasn't enough. He doesn't get any shoebox. He gets shoe boxes that are has a lot of shoes in them. He stacks it.
Mm-hmm.
He then climbs on top of the laundry platform. And normally he would fall, right?
Mm-hmm.
He actually found a piece of rope and he looped it around himself and put it on the handle.
No way.
So he wouldn't fall back. And I'm like,
who taught you that?
I'm like, I wouldn't have taught you that.
Oh, jeez.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Wait. Where do you think you picked it up from? I mean, he's probably observing something, right?
He's probably. You probably haven't heard of the Octonauts before.
No.
Anyway, Google it one time. Octonauts. It's just some funny kids program.
Octonauts.
Have a check it out. Maybe you got it from there. I don't know, but that's ridiculous. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that bit of a long-winded answer to your question about he's already made up his mind. Discipline, humility, respect. It starts at home, I think.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I always ask that question to people with kids.
Yeah,
because I'm interested in kind of, I guess, understanding how different people kind of approach that challenge, I guess you can say.
Yeah,
and there always seems to be something similar to what you mentioned. There always seems to be something in that space, but whether it's like free flow or kind of more rigid is the difference from what I've kind of observed.
And I think
anyway.
there's no right or wrong.
Yeah,
we're just doing our best, really.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like Boris, don't mind me. We've gone on for a long time now. I'm sure you realize we're actually recording this.
Oh, we are.
We are.
Holy crap! It's been over an hour already. Jesus.
Isn't that pretty cool? Remember how we first started conversation? You were like, "Oh man, it could be a bit different. I haven't done this over Zoom, right?" But here we are.
Holy crap.
Now, I'm pretty sure I could bring you on for podcasts 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? But then we might bore up the listeners, right? So let's take everything away. Let's remove everything, right? Let's go back into a new incognito tab. I want you to paint me a picture, Boris. In 30 years' time, where are you physically? Paint me a picture. You don't have to give me, paint me a picture.
Yeah, sure. So for me, I'm a really big fan of farm life. I wanna build my own farm one day with animals and gardens and, you know, you name it, kind of thing. I kind of see myself just living a quieter kind of life at a farm with family, and just kind of enjoying the day-to-day things, really. But at the same time, given how I've kind of been raised and what I've been through and whatever else, I hope that if I do have the privilege to have that kind of lifestyle, then I also hope that I'm actually working on something that I find meaningful as well. And I think that if I can do those two things as an individual, I will be leading a pretty fulfilled life if I can have that vision of the future. But we shall see. So,
Boris, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you having me, and awesome to finally be on, even though I'm 16 or 17 episodes late or something. So.
My apology. I should have kept you on for episode number 1. Fantastic, Boris.
All right. Awesome. Thank you, Jeff.